Yeah.
Okay. So there are those that are skeptical of the claims of occurrences on Skinwalker Ranch. But what do we make about independent corroboration of strange encounters in the vicinity of the ranch? John Garcia owns the adjacent property to the east of Skinwalker Ranch. He reported incidents that occurred on his property before Bigelow purchased the ranch. In one instance, he and his wife observed a huge orange basketball-shaped object larger than his house hovering over a fence line that shot off at incredible speed. Charles Wynn owns the adjacent property to the west of Skinwalker Ranch. One day while working on his property, he encountered a very bright light that, quote, looked like an arc welder, 3 to 4 feet in diameter. The light approached him rapidly, forcing him to dive into a water-filled ditch and covering his head with his arms. The light continued and flew off directly into the side of a hill and disappeared. Wynn also states, and this I thought was really important, Wynn states that Kenneth Myers told him that he had locks on his, and this is a quote, he had locks on his cupboards to keep the little white blue balls from getting into them.
Yeah, there you go.
There is a podcaster out there who is adamant that none of the phenomenon was occurring before Bigelow. They have a vested interest in why they're making this argument. I believe there's a lawsuit involved in this thing.
Okay.
So, and I want to be fair to, this both skeptics and I'm just looking for facts, looking for the truth, right? So I tried to look into these things, and I believe it's Myers' grandson claims that he was never told or that of anything occurring on the ranch, but there are plenty of records out there that indicate that there were other things going on.
Yeah. Not the least of which are the native accounts, as well. So,
right. Area resident and Professor Joseph Jr. Hicks investigated over 400 UFO sightings in the Uinta Basin starting in the 1950s. I'd estimate over 10% of the population of the Uinta Basin has seen something, according to him.
Wow.
Okay. In Bots 186, in Part 4, I mentioned that there was a nearby location that parallels much of the phenomenon described on Skinwalker Ranch. The following is an incredible story which I compiled largely based on the original investigative reports, but some of it was covered in Timothy Good's Alien Liaison, which in the United States is called Alien Contact, and in the book Hunt for Skinwalker by Collier and George Knapp. In the mid-1970s, John Durr, seismologist for the U.S. Geological Survey who served as an investigative consultant to APRO, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, was contacted by an individual representing several persons who did not wish to have their identities or their location revealed, but were experiencing very strange phenomenon. Following a few discussions, the individuals involved finally agreed to meet with Durr in person. This group consisted, and I'm going to give names here, but these are all aliases because they wanted to remain anonymous. Yeah. The first one was the business partner, Jim, was a middle-aged professional trained in physical and biological sciences and served in the U.S. military as a public information officer. A husband and wife, John and Barbara, who served in a management position with a large corporation and they were said to be very articulate. The couple's 3 sons, the elder of which was Joe, who was allowed to describe some of his experiences, a photographer named Roger, who photographed some of the evidence, a female neighbor named Connie, who was a close friend of the business partner, and a local police officer who described some of his investigations. As a result of the incredible details relayed in the initial interview, Durr chose to bring in to the investigation Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who served as the Director of Counseling and Testing and a Professor of Counseling at the University of Wyoming, and who was a consultant of psychology for APRO, and Dr. Peter Van Arsdale, anthropologist, adjunct professor at the University of Denver, and co-developer of the National Association for the Practice of Anthropology. During each of the initial interviews, the individuals involved requested that no publicity be given to the events and that their names and location of the incident be undisclosed. It was obvious to the interviewers that the individuals involved were under a great deal of stress. They all claimed that the emotional effects had altered their lives, and they believed that these events were part of a larger operation. A few years before the investigation began, the business partners pooled their resources to purchase a ranch in the Rocky Mountain area to establish a working cattle ranch. They located the land, and they were surprised to find that it had been abandoned for several years until their purchase. Shortly after moving onto the property in 1975, they began hearing strange humming sounds. Thinking that they may have been electrical in nature, Jim had the entire ranch house rewired, but the hum persisted despite resorting to shutting off of the main power. They noted that the hum was most prominent during windstorms and persisted for hours afterwards. Barbara described the sound more as a turbine and explained that during their first Christmas, the noise got so loud that it became difficult for them to hear each other speak.
Wow.
Jim eventually became convinced that the sound must emanate from water pumps located in old coal mines situated under the property. However, the existence of such mines and pumps was never validated. But that was just the beginning.
Yeah, like coal mines in the Rockies?
Yeah, but I mean, there would even have to be a power supply going.
Right, it still have to be running. Yep.
Unless they're coal powered.
It could be
pumps.
It could be coal powered coal. Yeah. It could have been wind in mining tunnels, I guess, making humming noises. But I guess they never found it still.
The evening of October 16th, 1975, Jim heard a cattle disturbance near a dam on the northwestern corner of his property. He grabbed his hound and his gun and he rushed over to investigate. As he walked between the cattle, he noted that the dog was acting extremely frightened. As he approached, he observed a large, brightly illuminated, trapezoidal-shaped object hovering over the dam. The object had the appearance of the top of a lighthouse. Although he was curious, due to the cattle and the dog's reactions, he decided to leave well enough alone and turn back to the house. Following the incident, the fearless hound, who had previously been known to chase mountain lions, then began refusing to go outside. Soon after the incident at the dam, at approximately 4:30 p.m., Jim, Barbara, and their friend Steve were in the house watching television. Suddenly, Barbara felt her heart rate and blood pressure rapidly increase. She began seeing spots and began having difficulty breathing. Thinking that she was having a heart attack, she yelled for help. Jim was lying awake on the couch, but he was paralyzed and unable to speak, as if he was drugged. Steve panicked and was trying to get Jim, but was unable to get him to respond. Barbara described what happened, stating, quote, "My thinking pattern felt different. Things just popped into my mind that were like pearls on a string and went right down to the end. I remembered things that I had completely forgotten, and that frightened me." She had an overwhelming feeling came over her to get out. She stated, quote, "I had no place that I wanted to go, but my immediate feeling was to get out, get in that car, and go away, anywhere." Shortly after the paralysis, the couple's 16-year-old son, Joe, and some friends discovered a mutilated cow 200 yards from the ranch house. They panicked, and somehow they had the feeling that they were being followed as they ran through the heavy snow back to the house. Jim followed their tracks back to the mutilated cow and stated, quote, "I followed the route, and we found huge footprints that had followed them all the way from the cow to the horse barn, and the footprints were even in the soft manure in the barn. I guess they were 18 inches. I didn't measure them, but they were quite large. I guess you would call it a Bigfoot footprint. Jim immediately contacted the police. However, they did not make it out to the property for several days, by which point the snow had melted. Jim was quite upset and angry over the delayed response and the loss of evidence. When the police investigated, they found that the cow's udders had been surgically removed, but the sac under the udders was undisturbed. It also had one eye, one ear, and the rectum removed, and all of the cow's blood was missing.
Yeah.
14 days later...
Exsanguinated.
Yep. 14 days later, a second mutilation was discovered on the property. This time, a bull that did not belong to the property owners. Subsequently, Jim spoke with the police about their apparent indifference to the mutilations. He was informed that only 1 in 4 cattle mutilations was being reported, yet there were already over 400 reports made in that county alone.
Man.
The police officer claimed that they had spoken with the FBI about the mutilations and were told that it was being done by extraterrestrials. Jim responded, quote, "I told him that if he couldn't solve the crime, at least don't blame it on something like that. I made an enemy of that man, and I frankly didn't care because I had lost 2 cattle."
Yeah. Wow.
The following week, a photographer, Roger, asked if he and a friend could visit the property. At approximately 10 p.m., they, along with Steve, heard a strange sound emanating from near a water tank approximately 60 yards from the house. Suddenly, a huge dark creature appeared running towards them, pushing its way directly through a barbed wire fence. Terrified, they ran inside the house and told Jim about what had just happened. Jim didn't believe them and went out to investigate. To his surprise, he discovered footprints and long strands of hair stuck in the barbed wire. The footprints were photographed and the hair samples were sent to Denver for examination, the result of which came back no known species.
Wonder what kind of examination they did.
Yeah, and I wonder what happened to that evidence.
Yeah.
This was, the mid-70s. But
Yeah. I want one of those. I want this human repulsion technology. You just turn it on and everybody wants to leave. It sounds very useful.
Yeah. That goes to that we were talking about earlier, that how they seem to be able to control or manipulate thought in some way.
Yeah.
Makes you think that they know more about our physiology than you would think.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. At this point, Jim began sleeping with a gun on the couch in front of the entry door of the home. One night at 2 a.m., he began hearing a humming sound. He jumped up and looked out the front window and observed a glowing disc originating out of the north, drifting across the property directly in front of the house, and then it followed a gully. Barbara did not see the disc, but was startled by the bright glow coming through her window as the object passed. The next day, Jim spoke with a couple friend who owned a restaurant in town, who confided in him that of an incident that had occurred before he had purchased the land. Their cousin and nephew drove past the land one night and were chased by a flying disc all the way to their home, where they ran inside and observed the disc hovering over their car for 45 minutes. Jim stated, quote, "After hearing this, I went back to the law officer and apologized. I had to eat crow over the fact that there was obviously something going on." He learned of a crazy lady who had made many reports of lights in the sky over the property before he had moved in.
Crazy lady, quote unquote.
Yes, exactly. The property owners then began hearing slamming noises, and the trickster aspect began. For example, the trunk ajar light came on in one of their cars when the trunk was locked. Upon checking, the pin switch had been purposely bent over that caused the light to illuminate. Then the transmissions in both of their vehicles became inoperable and had to be replaced. Soon after they began experiencing beating on the sides of their house, Jim became convinced that someone was trying to scare them away. This continued to escalate until one night, upon hearing the beating, Jim ran outside with his rifle and saw a big hairy thing running beside the corral. He took a shot at it. However, it barely flinched. Quote, "I am a good shot and I know I hit it. But there was no blood, no trace, no signs. We pursued it onto the next property, and then we heard the most unusual sound. They said it was like a double sound. It was like a whine and almost a beeping sound intermixed. Someone said it sounded mechanical, but it didn't to me. Jim notified the police, and he was berated for having shot and told that he was lucky that he didn't kill anyone." The harassment appeared to subside after that until things turned to the truly bizarre. How are we on time?
Oh, we're good. We'll just keep going.
All right. One night, the three boys were home alone and again heard the same strange sound, this time originating from two different locations as if communicating back and forth. They seemed to exhibit intelligent patterns with broken syllables, not at all like animal sounds. Then when Jim got home, the boys were hiding in the back bedroom, terrified because the beating on the walls had resumed and persisted all night. Jim lost his temper and stormed outside and yelled, or he says, quote, "I don't remember exactly what I said, and most of it probably can't be repeated. I think I threatened that if I can't have the land, they wouldn't either. I'll blow the whole thing away, and I meant it too. I would have destroyed it before I would have moved right then. I was mad," unquote. He then went back inside to calm down and have some coffee. A few minutes later, he walked back outside, and suddenly a voice came from out of nowhere and said, "Dr. Jim, we accept."
Holy crap.
Not long
Let
after,
that be a lesson to you.
They accept what? That he can explode everything and leave them the land? Is that what they're accepting? Or accepting him staying?
I think they were accepting a challenge.
Okay.
That's what it would
Challenge
appear.
accepted.
Yes. Not long after that, after the voice incident, Barbara was lying in bed when she observed something odd through a triangular opening between her curtains. She saw something outside move past her window. She could only see a portion of what appeared to be a very thin or a very shiny black box being carried under the arm of something. The box was not illuminated, but appeared to be reflecting the ambient light. One evening, a forest ranger named David and two friends were visiting when 9 discs landed in clear view in front of the home. Although Barbara and Jim could clearly see the 9 discs, their friend Harry, observing from a different window, saw what appeared to be large, dark, football-shaped objects. As Jim rushed out the door to get a better look, Barbara was immediately struck in the head by something, knocking her unconscious. The couple believed that this was done purposely to get Jim to return back inside the house. Jim went back to the police officer to relay the information concerning the odd event taking place on the ranch. He mentioned the black box incident, and the officer disclosed, quote, "They have a box, and he had seen it on occasion. He had seen blinking lights where they shouldn't be, in trees and such. He said he was out on patrol one night, and he saw a group in the trees. This box that was blinking, he said, he didn't want to go in alone and race back to town to pick up another officer to go with him. When he got back, the tree was gone. The box was gone. Everything was gone.
The tree was gone.
He thought they had gone into the ground. He said he had seen things go into the ground before." The next night, or one night in January of 1977, Jim and the older boy Joe noticed a dull yellow light similar to an old car headlight in the woods near the top of a hill.
Yep.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
They walked over to investigate and discovered one of those strange boxes laying on the ground. Jim told Joe to stay back about 10 feet, and he continued to approach the object. They noted that the box appeared to contain a light source inside and was exhibiting a strange buzzing sound. As Jim approached to within about 4 feet of the object, its tone changed completely to that similar to a hive of angry bees. Jim backed away and walked Joe back to the car and told him, no matter what happens, don't leave the car. He then very apprehensively headed back into the woods towards the black box. What happened next is one of the most unusual and perplexing stories in all the annals of the UFO phenomenon. As he entered the woods, Jim stated that he had to force his legs to take each step because he had no idea what he might encounter. As he neared the location of the box, there was a light all around that strangely did not seem to emanate from any particular source. As he slowly approached, he was met by 2 individuals standing in the light that seemed to be aware of his return, greeting him by name. Quote, "How nice of you to come," unquote. Apparently, 50 or 60 feet from them was a disc sitting on the ground which was slightly illuminated just enough to be visible. Jim stated, quote, "They apologized for the inconvenience they had caused us, told us that a more equitable arrangement would be worked out between us, whatever that means. I wanted to ask a lot of questions, but found that I didn't. There were several things they asked me not to repeat that had no significant meaning at all. They were unrelated to anything. I think maybe they were just checking to see if I would keep my mouth shut. I told them that if they were doing the cattle mutilations, it was very foolish to do so and draw so much attention to themselves. I complained about the damage to the cars, but they never admitted to doing any of it. One thing they did do, they mentioned the box, and that I did the right thing by backing away from it. It was what I call an implied threat. They nodded, and approximately 20 to 30 feet away, a Bigfoot, as I called him, got up and walked towards the box. The box changed tone, and he dropped. They said, quote, "As you can see, they are quite lethal," unquote.
Whoa.
They said they would come back and talk again.
It's the Ark of the Covenant, man.
There were no goodbyes. I just somehow felt it was time to go. So we're seeing this.
And this is one of those stories that implies that there's a connection between the UFO/alien phenomena and Sam Squanch.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned during the break, I read this story back in the early 90s. And when I read at that point, I was completely nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And I could not believe that Timothy Good would write about this. I said, this is just ridiculous. It has no place in this, I didn't see the relevance, but when you start looking at it as not necessarily being an isolated incident,
yeah,
maybe my perspective is a little bit different today.
Yeah, I think your perspective has broadened.
Yeah, right. So continuing a quote from Jim, "I hadn't gotten a really close look, but the 2 that spoke to me were not identical, the same as those I had seen before. They were similar. These were definitely humanoid. They were approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall. I would say they wore tight-fitting clothing, like a flight suit. I noticed the clothing changed color from brown to silver, but I don't know how. They were fair, and they had large eyes and seemed perfectly normal and completely relaxed. They had blonde hair and something over their head, but I could still see their hair. The thing that impressed me the most was their eyes, as if they were judging what. If I were to judge what they were, I would say they were humanoid. They were different than people, but not different enough that you wouldn't call them people," unquote.
They're like Nordics, except they're not super tall.
Their facial features were finer, and their eyes were larger. And they would have been striking, almost effeminate, completely self-assured. Judging by the ones I had seen before, they were larger, but they were more humanoid. And if anything, they were a half-breed. My first thought was somehow the government was trying to do this. He's still in denial of these things going on. Jim turned around and walked back home thinking, I was excited about the more equitable arrangement. I guess I had some illusion that they were going to give me the cure to cancer or $1 billion or something. at least pay for the car's transmission.
Right.
But that was far from the last strange occurrence.
Send Sam Squinch to fix the cars.
I know how crazy this sounds. Like I said, it's, but again, look at it in light of the craziness that we hear going on at Skinwalker.
Right.
It's like right down the line. It's like the same thing. Although Jim had been advised of a more equitable arrangement, he continued to sleep on the couch in front of the door with his shotgun. One night while laying on the couch, he looked up at the window and saw a black silhouette of a man wearing a tight-fitting suit of some kind. Jim got up and placed a large chair in front of the door and ran to Barbara's room and told her about what he had just seen. Suddenly, they hear the front door open and hit the chair loudly. Jim runs back to the door, which was closed once again, and just then he hears a loud voice in his head that says, quote, "We don't need to open the door to come into your home," unquote. Wow. Then the sound of buzzing bees started coming from the front room and traveled through the house to the bedroom door before fading away.
So the buzzing sound in the beginning is, all these buzzing sounds are like the black box, whatever it is.
Seems to be some correlation.
And they were hearing it on the property in the very beginning of the story, right?
Yeah.
They were hearing,
and they were thinking
what they were thinking was some type of a whine or sound. Yeah.
A hum is what they call it, yeah. But then there's this phenomenon of it being deadly or making them being repulsive, and then they do that demonstration with the Sasquatch.
What was the name of that town that has that?
Taos.
Taos hum. Yeah.
Taos, New Mexico has has a infamous hum.
It's the black box, man.
So this went on for quite a while. They were dealing with variety, and I'm giving you, this is like a synopsis of the original. And I'll post the original reports in the Discord. But eventually, the owners recognized patterns of activity that provoked encounters with the phenomenon. Jim stated, quote, "I know how to upset them. I could get a stack of wires and go out and get busy with them like I was putting something up. And I would go back inside the house and watch. And within a short period of time, they would be up there checking out what I had done." The next day, a friend from Texas, Dan, who was an expert in computer and electronics, and his wife and daughter were visiting while on vacation. So Jim decided to attempt a demonstration. As Jim described, quote, "I went up deliberately to stir them up. I found that certain elements very much upset them, silver being the main element. I discovered inadvertently that they shy away from silver. I think I stuck a silver bracelet in the ground along with some wires, like I was really putting something intense up. I didn't know what would happen, but I hoped that it would upset them." At approximately 2 a.m., the lights in the house went out, and a, quote, "very mechanical sounding voice spoke through all the radios and TV speakers in the house, stating, quote, 'Attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us.'" Dan's family was quite upset, and although he was convinced that this was some type of an elaborate hoax, once the power came back on, Dan stated, "Now I'm in my field," and began disassembling and inspecting all of the electronic devices, searching for some type of a receiver. He even resorted to searching through the entire home, going as far as dumping out the laundry bags in search of some form of device, but to no avail. Sometime later, while on their way into town one morning, Barbara and her 2 sons observed a huge cone-shaped UFO estimated to be several hundred feet across, 6 times the size of the house. Soon after, Jim was again asleep on the couch, and around 2 a.m. he was awakened but could not move or speak. Standing before him was a being which he described as, quote, approximately 7 feet tall, very skinny arms and legs, extremely skinny. It had an object on its chest. I could see the shape of it very clearly, like a box, but it wasn't flat. It was pointed. It had 3 hoses on each side. The creature had a thing over its head, like a helmet with plastic covering. It wasn't at all terrifying. It was more or less pathetic in appearance, almost helpless pathetic. It was just looking at me in the same way you would look at a patient on a table, not cruelly or indifferently, just looking. John had also had experiences with this type of being, but details of his encounters were not included in the released statements. As a result of this last visitation, all the harassment ceased for the time being. In this regard, Jim stated, quote, I think the reason this is so interesting to me is that we're headed towards a more amicable relationship with them. You know, like my talking with them. I kind of liked them. They were pleasant, and whatever they were, I hadn't decided if they came from space. I still am not sure of that. I'm almost excited to be able to live peacefully with whatever it was and wherever they're from. It wasn't humanoid form at all. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't threatening, and it wasn't dangerous. But the peace was short-lived. As Jim put it, quote, after that, everything went back double dose of tension. It got much worse. We knew we were unwanted. It was a gut-level feeling that is hard to describe exactly. We know that something wanted us out. This new form of hostility included unexplained fires, other forms of harassment. Then one day, a friend spent the night. The next morning, when everyone got up out of bed, they saw the friend out in the field walking slowly towards the woods. Then he would turn around and run back to the house, stop, and repeat the process. They thought he had lost his mind. When they grabbed a hold of him and asked him what he was doing, he said every time he got near the house, something took control over his body and forced him back towards the woods. At this point, they finally decided they needed to seek help and eventually reached out to Dr. Durr. When asked why they had chosen to do so, Jim responded, quote, I felt that the events that had occurred on the ranch were significant enough that someone of serious intent should be looking into it. Because I am reasonably certain that this is a permanent installation. I could go into a lot of reasons, I suppose, but the main reason is that our ranch overlooks a military installation. We have a perfect view. That is the only reason I can think of for a permanent installation being there.
Okay.
He's still thinking it's military.
Yeah. Or it's like these aliens' responses to the military that's nearby. Yeah.
And then, quote, it's not Big Brother from space who are interested in us as spiritual beings or whatever. I'm absolutely convinced that they couldn't care less if we live or die. We're nuisances. I can only assume that they're watching us, watching our military's potential because we can't conceive of anything else. I have no doubt that they are mutilating the cows or the cattle, none at all. If they wanted to do just biological research on cattle, they could have disposed of the remains without them being found. It is obvious that some intent to instill fear and it has been quite successful. There is much that can be discussed about the case, but what I find most interesting is the conclusion drawn by the landowners. Jim states, I think the reason that I need to give my opinion is that these creatures, whatever they are, the non-humanoid ones, have always appeared to be afraid of something. They are extremely nervous, extremely jumpy, extremely terrified of something, and I'm not sure I am sure it isn't us. That I have no doubt of. It isn't people. I'm sure they are watching the military base for some unknown reason. I'm actually more friendly towards the non-humanoid form than I am towards the ones that look more humanoid. I'm reasonably sure that the humanoids are afraid of them. Again, supposition. When I was talking to the law officer, he said activity ceased when this other type, the cone-shaped, showed up. Other people in the community saw it too. What he was relaying to me was the fact that the activity would somehow go down when the other ships showed up. There had been a consistent pattern of the discs diminishing when the other ship, the cones, showed up. I'm reasonably assured that the humanoids, or whatever you want to call them, are in the discs, and the other skinny non-humanoid types are in the ice cream cone-shaped thing. There is something going on between them because at the ranch, I know they were not interested in us at all. We were just nuisances. So he had the impression that they're two different...
Yeah, there's two factions,
Yes.
and they may be at odds with each other.
And they were just stuck in the middle.
Right. And the non-humanoid types that are in the cones are jumpy? Is that what he was saying? They're jumpy all the time?
No, he's saying, yes, the non-humanoid types acted
Are nervous,
but
yeah.
yet he said the calm ones, the humanoids were
are
the ones
that were doing all the agitation, yeah.
Right. So it's hard to say, but he said he got along with the non-humanoid ones better.
Yeah.
Strange.
It is
very strange. So this, I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, as I mentioned at the beginning of the story, the bulk of this information comes from the APRO bulletins published in 1978. More recently, a researcher reached out to the original investigators for further details. When asked what had become of the investigation, Dr. Durr stated that it was eventually dropped because it was discovered that the primary witness had used drugs and the investigators believed that this might impact his credibility. However, while writing his chapter on the subject, Tim Good spoke with Dr. Leo Sprinkle and asked him specifically for his opinion of the case. Sprinkle stated, quote, "My impressions and those of the other investigators, Durr and Van Arsdale, support the view that the witnesses described events as accurately as they could, and they were truly puzzled by the events, as were we."
What drugs were they using? Does it say?
No. Remember, this was in the 70s, so,
Yeah.
They might have...
Yeah,
I
they're just
know.
smoking a little weed, and they're like, "Oh man, you're on drugs."
Right, but I guess because of they were worried about their own credibility. They were afraid that if this was to come out or something, that it would somehow discredit them.
Okay.
Like I said, I should stress that this was in the 70s when high strangeness stories such as these coming out of Skinwalker were almost entirely filtered out and unrecognized by the ufological community. Looking back at the details of the alleged events and seeing how they parallel those at Skinwalker, roughly situated 350 miles away, one might draw different conclusions.
Yeah.
So this place is within 350 miles of Skinwalker.
Right.
As if the experiences at Rocky Mountain Ranch were not enough, there is yet another location that is also approximately 350 miles from Skinwalker Ranch, which is also experiencing very similar paranormal activity. However, unlike the Rocky Mountain Ranch, this site in Black Forest, Colorado, has received its fair share of media attention. Apparitions of strange phenomenon have been well documented on the site, and it has been called the, quote, portal to the underworld, unquote. In 1994, Fate magazine published pictures of strange orbs, beams of light, ghostly images and ghostly images that were taken on the site. But the phenomena experienced extends well beyond that. The trickster aspect is also present, as well as disembodied voices, hyperdimensional beings, and abductions. As with the Rocky Mountain Ranch, the owner is convinced that the U.S. government is behind all of this in some way, possibly testing psychotronic weapons, mind control, and or laser holograms. He states, quote, "I truly think the U.S. government has a hand in this. I don't think any one individual could get away with this for this period of time without getting caught. The government does testing out here that has military implications," unquote.
Well, yeah, his reason there is based on the idea that it would be humans hoaxing it or something. Like, no.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to be a big, powerful government in order to pull this off, humans.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There is one
But
final similarity to
there's-
Skinwalker.
There's also no reason to think that the U.S. government wouldn't be testing stuff like this. They're all involved in all this stuff on so many levels.
Yep.
But anyway, go on.
The other similarity between this ranch and Skinwalker, Robert Bigelow was at one time in negotiations to purchase this property.
There you go.
So you have 3 locations in the same vicinity, all experiencing the same type of. In addition to these sites, there are other locations that share many of the same peculiar phenomenon, and these include Marley Woods in south central Missouri, investigated by Ted Phillips and Thomas Ferrario. The Meadow, a secret location in the southern United States, investigated by Trey Hudson. Stardust Ranch in Rainbow Valley, Arizona, investigated by John Edmonds. Dulce, New Mexico, investigated by NIDS and others, and is also closely associated with the infamous Paul Benowitz case. And Burlington, England, which even includes reported mutilations of sea mammals, investigated by Paul Sinclair, to name just a few. So, what is to be made of all of this? Do the similarities of experiences in these disparate locations suggest some type of a connection? One person above anyone else holds in his possession data that might hold the answers. And he has made some pretty eye-opening statements. In 2017, Laura Logan interviewed Robert Bigelow for 60 Minutes. In that interview, he stated, "There has been an existing presence, an ET presence." He went on, quote, "I spent millions and millions. I probably spent more than any other individual in the United States has ever spent on the subject." When he was asked if it was risky for him to express such views publicly, Bigelow responded, "I don't give a damn." Logan asked, "Why not?" He said, "I don't care." Logan, "Aren't you worried what people are going to say? Did you see, aren't you worried that people are going to say, 'Did you hear that guy? He sounds like he's crazy'?" Bigelow, "I don't care. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change reality of what I know." Logan, "Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter intelligent life?" Bigelow, "You don't have to go anywhere."
Yeah, there you go.
Logan, "You can find it here?" Bigelow, "Yeah, right here under people's noses."
Yep. There you go. Dang long heads.
Definitely sounds like custodians, man. I mean,
Yeah.
in some cases.
What was I'm trying to remember where I read this. There was something about, there was like a questionnaire. I can't remember if it was for an application to work for the government or something. I can't remember what it was I read, but there was a series of questions you have to answer. And one of the questions was, do you believe you get secret messages on your TV or radio? right? It's like
I remember that vaguely too.
I remember
What is-
reading that and wondering, like, who would say yes, even if they thought that they did? You know, I mean, and like in the context of like a job application,
Yeah.
like, would you say yes? I totally get secret messages from my radio. But yeah, when you were saying that they're all their radios and stuff, you know, I'm just like, there it is. Some people do get messages from their radios from extraterrestrials or the government or whatever it is that they end up thinking it is.
You know, in the proximity of those, at least those 3 locations, and actually there seems to be in many cases, there's a correlation between the location and military facilities.
Yeah.
So it's, you know,
That's
it's
what,
not unreasonable to think that there's a connection.
That's
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
was thinking too. Is it, and beyond that, it's not unreasonable to think that, you know, maybe that's one of the reasons why the military installation is there in the first place.
That's what I was going to say. What is the connection, though? Is the connection the military is there because that stuff happens there?
Or is the stuff happening there because there's a military installation? It
Right.
could go either way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, clearly the you know, the government has been involved in all types of, you know, experiments, you know, with psychics and
Yep.
and manipulation through, you know, ultrasonic means and
Yeah.
to modify behavior. But, you know, some of this is pretty extreme where
Yeah.
they're, you know, holographic, you know,
Yeah.
images and things like that. Okay, I can see it in some ways, but how do you create a hologram in an enclosed space from a distance
Yeah.
where you don't have a direct beam
Yeah.
line of
Ask
sight? You know,
Joseph Smith. I mean, that was his first vision, right? It's
Yeah.
like this holographic. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can stop light in mid wave or midstream, then it
Yeah, I
wouldn't
think
surprise
it's-
me if you use a certain type of light that passes through the barrier that you want to get through, and then you stop it somewhere and have it convert to a different frequency.
Yeah. To a visible spectrum. Yep.
yeah. I mean, and there's also a lot of examples where beams of light came through walls.
Yeah.
And then we also touched in the Patreon segment last time. We were talking about how there seems to be like a time dilation in the vicinity of craft a lot of times where, and for those that didn't hear the Patreon section, I mentioned how in Trinity, the description of that the kids gave of the beings that they saw around the crashed
Yeah.
craft, that they were moving in like jerky movements.
Yeah.
They weren't fluid. They were
Right.
literally jumping from one spot to another.
Yeah.
And the parallel between that and the Bentwaters RAF base
Yeah.
incident from 1980, where allegedly this landing was filmed, and they had light rigs set up. And according to one of the witnesses, he noted that the shadows did not move in sync with the movement of the
Yeah.
objects of anything. In other words, there was a delayed reaction, like the shadows were moving slower than the people.
Yeah.
So there, like I said, there appears to be some type of a time dilation going on here.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's could be tech. I mean, that's
Yeah. Or
very
even not
advanced
time
tech.
dilation, but something weird with light.
right. Maybe
Because if it's
some
the
new
shadows,
new
yeah.
physics,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
new application of physics,
Yeah.
where they're controlling photons in a different way than what we've.
Yeah, and that RAF Bentwaters in Rendlesham, I mean, Rendlesham Forest has been known, is full of folklore going back, right?
Yep.
Centuries, with all kinds of sightings of stuff and ghosts and giant black dogs and, fae and goblins and who knows what. It's got all kinds of history there too. So it's the same thing. And then you've got this military base, right? But the military base is not nearly as old as all those legends.
Yeah.
Which is like begs the question of like what really is the,
Right. What happens? How do you interpret the phenomenon when there seems to be historical record of it existing in that vicinity prior to Bigelow buying military bases being built. When you're dealing with things, here, like for example with the black cloud reports, where these things are pretty well established throughout history, but in that particular area in Utah, being reported in the newspaper in the 1800s, it'd be hard to pin that on military tech.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, there is, the UFO phenomena, there is definitely, without a doubt, overlap between advanced tech and other things. There's more than one thing going on here.
Oh, yeah.
But that does not necessarily preclude the possibility that those things are not related. In other words, the tech may have been derived from...
That's true.
Knowledge gained from the phenomenon itself.
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, and then the tech that's derived from the phenomena results in more sightings of strange things.
Correct.
Yeah.
And crashes.
Yeah.
And
because we're trying stuff.
The definition of tech can be kind of a gray area too.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm with you on the who was it? You that said this about the idea of magic and all of these things. I mean, you can look at it as a form of technology, right? No matter what, you're developing something that gives you more control over the reality that your existence.
Yeah.
Maybe
that could be interpreted as ancient tech.
Yeah. Again, I'll bring up Gordon White in his book Starships. He calls magic technology.
Yeah.
He refers to it as tech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
I promise we'll be getting very deeply into that subject in the near future.
All right. Sounds good.
Heck yeah, buddy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we had to cut this thing into pieces because of the thunderstorms, and hopefully it will sound fluid. Anyway.
Yeah.
I never sound fluid.
So basically, Marty will cover up the fact that we had to cut it up into pieces.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
I'm just trying to do an accurate Bigelow representation.
Yeah, no, it was good. That was good stuff. All right, you guys can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. That's got all the podcast-related stuff there, including the encyclopedia, the glossary, the snake skins, which is a merchandise store, and join the Pyramid Scheme. If you want to hear the Patreon segments, we are putting out Patreon content now. And I think we're actually about to record one right now with Marty after we finish this recording. So if you want to keep hearing what we're talking about today, sign up for the Patreon.
Yeah, what are we doing? I think we're going to talk about the UAP report, maybe?
Yeah, we'll talk about the UAP report and some other thoughts on this topic here. And but yeah, thank you guys so much, especially to Jeff, who runs the Discord and the Library of the Serpent, and History Shift, who makes all of our podcasts into YouTube videos. And all of you listeners out there, we love you guys.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.